Yes, we just. So the second part of the test. No.
All right, it's 4 o'clock. Let's go and get started. All right, good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone doing today? Good, good. All right, it's midterm season, I know, so I know probably everyone's really stressed, but you know, it'll pass. All right, speaking of midterms, you know, we have our midterm exam for this class coming up, and so you know, I sent an email about that this morning with some of the information, but I wanted to talk about it again, you know, in case you didn't read that email. Okay. So the midterm is scheduled for next Thursday, so that's going to be October 6th, right? And it's going to take place in class. And so, you know, I know for this class, just I know because of the timing, a lot of people attend on Zoom, but you know, just know for that for the midterm exam, you have to be here in person. And so there's no plans to offer the exam virtually. So please make sure to come to class next Thursday. Okay. I put out a study guide this morning, and so if you haven't taken a look at it, then I would highly suggest that you do, because that study guide basically is going to be your checklist for things to study for the exam. Okay, and so definitely go through that checklist. And you know, what I like to do for all my exams is that you know, we've kind of just been shooting right through all the content up until this point, but I know there's some topics that you know, may not be sticking as well as others. And so what I like to do before every exam is I like to review the topics that people seem to be, you know, confused about the most, right? And so what I'm going to do in a couple of days, probably on Thursday, I'm going to go ahead and post a poll on Canvas where you can vote on the topics that you feel most uncomfortable with. Okay, and we've covered a lot so far. And so, you know, for the study guide this morning, I actually had to trim out quite a few topics that we went over just so that it's not an overwhelming amount to study for one exam. And so, you know, I want you guys to take a look at the study guide, you know, really, you know, think about which parts of the class you're struggling with the most so far, and then let me know via the poll. And then what I'll do on Monday is that I'll record a midterm review video to kind of cover those topics that people seem to be struggling with the most, just to help you with your study. Okay. So definitely check out the study guide and just be prepared for the poll on Thursday, because usually I get about maybe half the class responding to the poll, and you know, it's always better when more people respond to this poll, because then I know that the midterm review is going to be more helpful for people. In terms of logistics, you know, for the exam itself, you'll be allowed to bring a writing utensil, so that's your pencil or pen or whatever. You can bring a calculator to help you with the calculations, and so, you know, I'm not going to make you do calculations by hand. And you can bring one 8.5 by 11 sheet of notes. Okay. And so you can use both sides. You can write it or you can type it, you know, whichever you feel most comfortable with. And you can write pretty much anything on that note sheet. And so generally, I think people write, you know, summaries of the important concepts. And so they'll write kind of bullet points, you know, summarizing the important things. They might have example problems on there just to help you have a reference for certain problems. You can put motivational quotes, you know, in case you're feeling, you know, down during the exam. You can read that motivational quote, get a jolt of motivation to help you finish it out. So, you know, you can really write whatever. The only thing you can't write on the cheat sheet are just the answers to the exam, which, you know, I hope no one has, because that would mean someone broke into my office or hacked my computer, which is a bigger problem than just one exam. But, you know, there's that. Okay. All right. And so, you know, the plan for today and for the rest of the week, I'm hoping to finish up all of spinal biomechanics this week, because that's my cutoff point for the exam. And so nothing after this week will be on the exam. So this week's kind of the last of what you need to work on. Okay. All right. And so with that, you know, I think I have one more example I want to do for lower extremity, and then from there we'll jump to spinal biomechanics. Homework three was posted over the weekend. And so I finished up the solutions for that on Sunday. And so that's there for you as well. And so the homework 3 basically is going to cover lower extremity. It's going to cover spine, and going to give you guys a bit more practice with the static biomechanical analysis. That's going to be a big focus for that exam. Okay, so definitely check out homework 3. Homework 3 is going to be due on Tuesday of next week. And because, you know, there's kind of a short window, so homework 3 is due Tuesday and the exam is on Thursday, I'm going to post the solutions to homework 3 on Tuesday night, basically right when it's due. So you'll have that available for you to study as well. Okay, and so that's all my announcements. So are there any questions I can answer before we get started for today? Oh, homework 2 solutions. I graded those pretty quickly, so I'm going to wait probably until tomorrow night to post solutions for homework 2. And so I'm just going to clean it up a little bit before I post it. Okay, all right, so let's go ahead and get started. And where we left off on last Thursday was lower extremity lower extremity statics. And so just like, the upper extremity, what we're interested in when in static biomechanical analysis is computing muscle forces and joint reaction forces in the body when it's under certain configurations. Okay? Okay. All right, and so I think we did one example with the hip. We did one example at the knee, and so the last major joint in the lower extremity is the ankle. Okay, and so let's go ahead and do one more example with the ankle. And so the ankle joint's actually quite interesting because it actually shares a lot of similarities with the knee in that the ankle joint is actually comprised of multiple bones coming together into one. Because normally when you think of a joint, you think of just 2 bones coming together at the joint, and those 2 bones are making contact. But with the knee and the ankle, you have kind of, in the knee's case, you have 3 bones that are kind of coming together, and for the ankle, you have more than 3 bones. Okay. Right? And so the bones that comprise the ankle joint are the tibia. So the tibia being the larger bone in your lower leg. We have the fibula. So the fibula is the smaller bone in the lower leg. And then we have all the bones in your foot itself. And so we call those the tarsal bones. Okay. And so it's interesting because you have quite a few bones that comprise the ankle joint. And so by itself, the bones are not that stable. So what you have instead are, very similar to the knee, a lot of ligaments and a lot of tendons that kind of, hold together the ankle joint. Okay? In terms of actions, in terms of muscles, there's 2 primary actions that the ankle can do. In reality, the ankle is quite complex. It can do quite a few different actions and motions. But there are 2 that we consider to be kind of the most important, and that's plantar flexion and dorsiflexion. Okay? Okay. And so if I were to draw a foot, look good all the way up until I made the toes. Oh well. Okay. And so here's the side view of the foot. And so there's kind of 2 major muscles that are responsible for these. And so we have the one in the back. And so this is your calf muscle. Your calf muscle is the primary muscle that's responsible for plantar flexion. And then we have a muscle on the front of your leg, which is a much smaller muscle. And we call that muscle the tibialis anterior. And because it's on the front and it kind of pulls your foot upwards, this is responsible for dorsiflexion. Okay. So remember the difference. So plantar flexion means you're planting your foot into the ground. And so when you're walking and you kind of push off of your leg, that's plantar flexion. Okay. And dorsiflexion is the opposite. So dorsiflexion means, when you lift your toes up and you kind of point them to the sky, kind of like a dorsal fin on a elephant. Okay. So those are the primary two, actions that we're concerned with at the ankle. There's others, of course, like you can roll your ankle inwards, you can roll it outwards. So that's varus and valgus, but we focus mostly on these two because these are actions that you do every day when you're walking from point A to point B. Okay. And so let's do an example. Let's do an example of an ankle that's in plantar flexion. In particular, we'll look at someone standing on their toes. Okay. Okay. So we're going to draw foot attempt number 2. It's a little better. Okay. And so here we have someone that's standing on their toes. Okay. We have the calf muscle acting in the back. Okay. And so we have a muscle force. We'll call that FM. Okay. And I'm going to define the muscle attachment here a little bit differently than I have before. Because normally when we define the muscle angle or the attachment angle, we define it with respect to the horizontal axis. Here, I'm going to define it with respect to the vertical axis. Okay. And so what we say is theta M there is going to be the angle that FM makes with the vertical, the y-axis. Okay. The ankle joint itself, we'll approximate it to be approximated right here. Okay. And just for the sake of simplicity, we'll say that it's on the same horizontal plane as the line of action of the muscle. Okay. The horizontal distance between the muscle force and the joint, we'll call that LM, just like we traditionally do. And then we have the joint reaction forces. And so we have JX in the horizontal direction and JY. Okay. Right, so those three are all of our knowns. In addition to that, we need to load. And in this particular case, because we're looking at just the foot, the load is going to be supplied via a normal force from the ground. Okay. And so what we're saying is that the person's weight is basically acting upwards on this toe. Okay. So this is the case of someone standing on their toes on just one foot. Okay. And so the horizontal distance between the normal force and the ankle joint, we'll call that LW. Okay. Okay, so that's it for the parameters. And so there's not too much going on here. We just have one load force, but we need to put some numbers on this. And so let's say that W here has a magnitude of 300 newtons. Theta M, we'll say here is 30 degrees. LM Where did I find LM? LM here is 3 centimeters. And then LW will be 5 centimeters. Okay. Okay, so based on this information here, we have everything we need. And so let's go ahead and compute the muscle force and the joint reaction forces. Okay. All right, and so just like we normally do in these situations, we're going to be forming the equilibrium equations. And so we're going to start with the moment equation around the ankle joint, and then the sum of the force in the x and the y directions to get jx and jy. Okay, any questions on the setup for this problem here? Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. And so let's start by summing the moments around the joint. Okay. And so we need all the forces that are going to create a moment around the ankle joint, as well as the moment arms, right? So let's start with the weight W. And so the weight W, if we kind of follow this around, is going to have a counterclockwise moment. Okay. And luckily, we're given a completely vertical force W, as well as the horizontal moment arms. We have W, we just take the product of W and L W. So, if it helps, I always like to, just kind of make sure and confirm that, the expression that I have for the moment is actually correct, right? And so remember, the way that you can check is that if you basically take the product of the muscle, or the force magnitude, as well as the perpendicular distance between the force and the joint, okay? And so if I were to draw a line here, draw it a little better. And so if I were to draw a line directly from the joint to this, to the line of action for this force W right here, okay? Because that line there is perfectly horizontal, and we know the force W is perfectly vertical, then those two are going to form a 90-degree angle. Okay, so that's going to be perpendicular. And so the fact that these two lines are perpendicular means that that horizontal distance is going to be the minimum distance between the force W and the ankle joint J. Okay. And it just so happens that we're given that horizontal distance as LW. Okay. And so in this case, LW right here, as it's given, is the minimum distance between the force and the joint. Okay. And so kind of forming those, making that little extra effort to kind of draw that line and make sure it's perpendicular. Or you'll say very soon for the muscle force, making sure we get the component that has that perpendicular distance. That's going to help a lot because it can be confusing sometimes to look at these figures and see, first of all, what's the line of action, what's the moment arm, what's the perpendicular distance and all that stuff. And so draw. And so I really encourage you guys draw the picture, make some extra drawings if you need to really confirm what's the right distances, because it's going to help a lot. Okay, and so that's the moment with respect to W. Now let's do the moment. Let's do the moment from the muscle force. Okay. And here we have to be a little bit careful because the angle that we're given here is not traditional. It's not the traditional angle with respect to the horizontal. This is the angle with respect to the vertical, right? And so just like we did before, we can take this muscle force and split it up into its components. Okay. And so if we draw the horizontal component Fx right there, and then the vertical component here Fy, okay? So I'm kind of working on this area of the notes right there, okay? And so if we split that FM up into components, we can see that Fx is pointed straight at the joint. And so we know that Fx is not going to contribute to the moment at all because there's no moment arm for Fx. Okay? Meanwhile, Fy here, okay, Fy is going to contribute to the moment because you can see here that we do have a moment arm for Fy, and its distance is given by Ln. Okay. Okay. And so what we need to do is we need to multiply the vertical component of FM together with the horizontal distance LM. Okay. So let's go ahead and do that. And so first, let's do the vertical component. And so the vertical component of FM is going to be FM cosine of theta M. Okay. Remember, usually we do sine, but here we're going to do cosine because the angle is defined on the other side. So the angle is defined with respect to the vertical. And so that's why we're going to use cosine of theta M and not sine. And then we're going to multiply that by the perpendicular distance, which is the moment arm LM. And of course, all this is equal to 0. Okay. All right, so what we can do from here is we can solve this equation simply for FM. And so if we arrange some of the terms, and so we move FM cosine theta M LM to the other side, we divide by cosine theta M LM. What we get is FM is equal to W LW LM cosine theta M. Okay. And so if we plug in the numbers for this, we get a muscle force of 577.35 newtons. Okay. Okay. Any questions on how we got this result right here? Okay. All right, and so now that we have the muscle force, first of all, you see that the muscle force is higher than the weight, right? And so the weight we're given here is 300 newtons. And so, in order to sustain this kind of tiptoe motion, the muscle has to exert a higher amount of force than the external one, okay? But that's kind of been true for all the examples that we've done so far. All right, so the next step is we're going to compute the joint reactions. And so we do this in exactly the same way as before. And so we're going to do some of the forces in the x direction. Okay. And so some of the forces in the x direction, we have FM sine theta plus Jx is equal to 0. Okay. So those are the only horizontal forces that we have in this equation, right? We have in this free body diagram. And so if we solve for this, we get Jx is equal to minus FM sine theta. So we plug in for that, we get minus 288.68 newtons. Finally, we can do the same for Fy. So we have some of the forces in the y direction is equal to Fm cosine theta plus Jy plus W is equal to 0. We solve for Jy. Jy is equal to minus W minus Fm cosine theta. Theta M. Okay. We plug in for that, we get a minus 800 newtons. All right, and so I think this example, not too difficult, but a little bit of a wrinkle with how the ankle is defined. And so once again, when you're doing these problems, I think probably the most important step that you can do here is the free body diagram, making sure you get that, you account for all the forces, you account for all the distances, you label everything, and you make it kind of clear where everything is, okay? Because from there, once you have a good free body diagram, then the equilibrium equations kind of fall out just very easily from that. All right, any questions on this example here? Okay. All right, and so that's it for the examples that I have for the lower extremity. Before we move on to the spines, though, I did want to talk about the some injuries. Okay, so let me go ahead and share my laptops, or my laptop, the podium screen here. Okay, and so let's talk about some common injuries that can occur in the lower extremity. So, we'll kind of go in the same order that we did. So we'll start at the hip, we'll go down to the knees, and then down to the ankles. Okay. So some common injuries of the hip. And so the hip, like we mentioned before, it is a very stable joint, but, it still is, susceptible to injuries, right? In particular, you probably hear that, for a lot of older people, that they have to get a hip replacement, or they have to repair something in their hip, right? And so one common injury that can occur for older individuals is actually a fracture of that joint. Okay. And so even though the femoral head, or the head of the femur here, is relatively large and chunky of a bone, what can happen in older individuals that suffer from osteoporosis? Remember, osteoporosis is a condition where their bones get weaker and more brittle. Then, a common site for fracture is actually at the hip joint, because of just how much stress it undergoes, when the person's standing, moving, and bearing weight. Okay. And of course, if you have fractured your hip joint, then that's, very painful, and it can cause you to lose balance and fall. Okay. Contusions are also common. So contusion is just simply a bruise. And so, this front of your thigh is basically susceptible to a lot of impacts. And so if you've growing up around pranksters, they've probably given you like a dead leg or something like that. And so that's basically just a bruise on your thigh. Okay. And even besides that, just naturally, just how it's placed on the front of your body, and you kind of lead with your legs as you're walking, it's you bump into stuff, and that's where bruises occur. And another common injury at the hip is a hamstring strain. And so, if the hamstring, I think, is one of the more common muscles that get injured. Okay. And the hamstring is a very important muscle for the hip. And so it's responsible for hip flexion. Okay. And if you kind of put it in an awkward position during activities, then you can cause injury. Okay. So I'd say those are the three most common injuries that can happen at the hip. Although, they're either not that serious, or they only occur, for either older people or for athletes, just because the hip is so stable. And so, for normal healthy individuals, normally you don't have to worry too much about your hip. Okay, so now let's talk about the lower leg. And so the knee and the lower leg. And so, these injuries are actually more common, especially if you do any kind of athletic activities, okay? Because a lot of the ligaments and the soft tissue in the knee are susceptible to injury, okay? And so probably the one you hear most often about is an ACL injury, okay? And so remember, the ACL is one of the ligaments that crosses on the inside of your knee. And so that can be hurt quite a lot. And it's most common in sports which require a lot of pivoting or cutting or any kind of change of directions, okay? Because that action of, when you pivot, when you kind of make a quick cut on your knee, that puts a lot of shearing forces on your knee that your ACL basically has to sustain, okay? And so if your ACL, if you put an unusually large amount on there, and let's say the muscles in your leg are particularly fatigued at the moment, then that puts, a little bit too much strain on your ACL, and it could cause injury or a tear, okay? And what's scary about these injuries is that most of the time they're non-contact, and so they occur, without an external force that's acting on it. It's just the body kind of, trying to move on its own that can cause this injury. Okay. Next, we have injuries to the PCL and the MCL, and so the PCL, I think, is a little bit less common just because of how it is. But MCL injuries are very common. So actually, the image that I'm showing you here is actually kind of a scary image of someone injuring their MCL, okay? Because the MCL, remember, it's kind of a ligament that runs kind of on the inside of your leg, but on the outside of your knee. And if you kind of stretch, and if you kind of bend the knee in a certain motion like this, okay, and so you can kind of see because the person is contacting the knee from the outside, it's causing the knee to kind of buckle inwards like that, okay. And so your MCL is a ligament that is on kind of on the inside of your knee right here. And so any kind of motion that kind of puts your leg into kind of a bending motion like this, you know, where your knee is kind of your knee is kind of buckling inwards, you know, that's going to put your MCL at risk of injury because that puts a lot of strain on this MCL right here. Okay. And so any situation where you're sustaining an impact or blow from the outside, that's going to be a big risk of injury for your knee. Okay. Okay, and so the last, I'd say, common knee injury that can occur is a meniscus tear. Okay, and so you know we'll be talking more about these in terms of the spine, but it's not uncommon for different parts of your body to have kind of like, almost like a shock absorber in the joint. Okay, and so your knee, and I'll use you know Mr. Peterson here as an example. Okay? And so your knee is comprised of you know two bones like this. I'm going to draw that again. Okay, and so your knee is comprised of two bones, and so you have your femur that comes up like this, and you have your tibial plateau that comes up like this. Okay, and so as you imagine, you know, as you kind of walk throughout the day, or as you kind of hop or run around, you know, these two bones kind of compress and contact each other kind of on a regular basis. Okay, and so to soften those blows, you know, to soften those compressive blows, you know, one thing your body does is that it puts kind of a cushion, green on green, great idea. Okay. And so there's almost like a shock absorber or like a cushion that's sitting right on top of your tibia. Okay. And so the purpose of this is that, you know, as you kind of sustain, you know, compressive contacts, instead of having bone-on-bone contacts, you contact this meniscus instead. Okay. And this is not the only part of your body that has this. And so we'll see very soon that the spine has something very similar, okay? And it's used to prevent injury, okay? But because this meniscus, it's essentially very soft tissue, and so it's nothing rigid like bone, what can happen sometimes is that this meniscus can actually tear, okay? And so if there's a situation where, you know, because the meniscus attaches right to your MCL, okay? And so if your MCL gets strained to a certain degree and it actually kind of rips off a piece of the meniscus just like that, you know, you might have a piece of loose tissue in your knee that's kind of just flapping there. And it can cause, you know, some pain, some discomfort, depending on the degree. And it can actually cause some locking effect to occur as well. Right? And so that's a meniscus tear. And so, you know, I actually tore my meniscus in high school too. So I have a piece of my meniscus that's actually missing in my right knee. Because I tore it playing soccer in high school, and it was a little bit too much to repair it. And so what the doctor did was they actually kind of took a scalpel and just kind of carved out the piece of flapping tissue, so I don't have that flapping thing. And so, you know, my knee's feeling better now, but you know, I probably will develop arthritis in that knee, maybe in maybe 10, 15 years, because you know I don't have as much protection as I did before. Okay, any questions on knee injuries here? Yeah, so the knee is fascinating. Actually, my dad actually sustained a knee injury too. So I have a lot of personal knowledge of knee injuries. And my dad tore his ACL playing basketball. So. Okay, and so let's continue. And so there's more injuries that can occur in the knee and lower leg. Okay, and there is a category of injuries called overuse injuries. And so if you kind of subject your knee to a lot of kind of repeated stresses, particularly stresses that it may not be used to, then you can cause some injury there. Okay, so one of the more famous kinds, and one of the more common ones, is called a breaststroker's knee. Okay, and so if you're familiar with the breaststroke in swimming, you know, you kind of flail your legs out and kind of kick them inwards, you know, to kind of create kind of like almost like a you know, reverse suction motion in the back to kind of propel you forward. Okay, but this motion actually puts a lot of strain on your knee that I think not a lot of people think about, because you know, even though you're not bearing any weight, just kind of the way that you kick your leg out and then you kind of kick the leg in, you know, really suddenly, puts a lot of strain on the knee, particularly at the MCL. Okay. And so for swimmers that do this a lot and they don't, take proper care to rest and rehabilitate their knees, they could get an injury at their knees called breaststroker's knee, right? And I think it surprises a lot of people because you don't really put any weight on it, but you can still injure knee, right? And so it's all about kind of putting your body in situations that maybe it's not comfortable with, or maybe it's not used to. And if you do that too much, then it can cause injury. Okay. Another common example for people that run a lot are shin splints. Okay. And so shin splints is kind of the informal term for people that run a lot and they get kind of these micro fractures or micro bone spurs in their lower leg bone, and so in their tibia or their fibula. Okay. Okay. And so another common injury is patellofemoral pain syndrome. Okay. And so this is characterized by if you have pain in your patella. Okay. And you mostly experience this before and after any kind of physical activity. And so, even though doctors can diagnose it now, the exact cause is still kind of under research. And so, that's kind of another interesting one as well. Okay, so now let's finally get to the ankle and the foot, right? And so, the ankle is another joint that's very often injured, right? And so I think the most common one is an ankle sprain. Okay? And so I think there's a statistic that said ankle sprains are actually the most common injury among athletes. And so when you sprain your ankle, what's happening basically is that you're stretching or you're straining the ligaments in your ankle so much that the ligaments actually either rupture or a tear might develop. Okay. And the most common type of injury is that if you roll your ankle outwards, and so that causes an ankle sprain on the outside of your knee, or in other words, on the lateral side of your ankle. Okay. All right. So you also have some overuse injuries, and so you could get an injury in your Achilles tendon if you overuse it too much. Okay. And so you might have heard of of injuries to your Achilles tendon, and so that can happen to a decent number of people. And if you rupture your Achilles tendon, it's actually quite a serious injury because it's very difficult to heal from that. And so it's pretty bad. Okay. You can also get stress fractures in your bones. And so, just like we talked about before, stress fractures are these injuries that can occur where if you kind of overuse the bones too much, you put a lot of contact on it, and that causes the bones in there to weaken, and you get a lot of these kind of micro fractures inside the bones. Okay. And another interesting injury is called an alignment anomaly. So for people that kind of sprain their ankles a lot, or even worse, they might dislocate their bones a lot. What can happen sometimes is that if you don't set it back correctly, or if your body doesn't heal correctly, your bones and your joints might be kind of permanently misaligned. And so that can happen actually quite a lot in the ankles with unnatural kind of varus or valgus conditions. And this puts, as you can imagine, a lot of strain on the ligaments and tendons in your lower extremity. Okay. And that's also not a very good thing. Okay. Okay. And so I think that's it for lower extremity injuries. And so are there any questions on any of this? Great. All right, and so that's it for lower extremity. And so let's go ahead and let me switch presentations here. Okay. And so now let's go ahead and talk about the spine. Okay. I get the taskbar. Whatever. Okay. Windows taskbar wants to stick around. They're interested in the spine too. Okay, and so the spine is pretty much the last major part of the body that we're going to talk about in this unit. Okay, so we talked about everything in the upper extremity. We talked about everything in the lower extremity. Your spine kind of governs everything else. And so, when I say spine, I include your spinal column, your vertebrae, but also your neck as well. And so that's also part of the spine. Okay, and so the main responsibilities of the spine are that it's it's a major load bearing structure, right? And so almost your entire weight of your body, from your head, and down is supported by your spine to some degree, okay? And then your legs kind of support everything above that. Another important part of your spine is that it's the only mechanical linkage between the upper extremity and the lower extremity. And so if you look at a skeleton and you look and see, all the bones of your upper body and your lower body, you'll see that actually the only thing connecting them is the spine. So that's, important for structural purposes, okay? And of course, probably the most important part of the spine, or the most important job, is that it protects the very delicate spinal cord. And so the spinal cord is a very big kind of nerve that runs from your brain to basically all the rest of your body, okay? And so it's almost like the central control wire that kind of goes through your whole body. So if you injure your spinal cord, you injure kind of that nervous system, it's a lot of bad things can happen. You can end up paralyzed, you can end up losing control of a lot of different parts of your body. So protecting that spinal cord is really important. And that's why the spinal column, all your vertebrate bones, serve that important purpose, okay? All right. And so what's interesting about the spine is that, you can split the spine up into several different sections, and we'll go over that in a second. And the most important part of the spine, the one that people injure the most, is called your lumbar spine. And so that's going to be in your lower area down here, okay? And we'll also talk about in this unit a lot of the core muscles in your body as well. So your abdominal muscles, your back muscles, your lateral muscles, they all play important roles in, not only supporting your weight, but also keeping your balance and supporting the spine as well. Okay. Okay. And so let's talk about the 5 different sections of the spine. And so, what's interesting about the spine is that, if you look at it, it's kind of has this kind of curvy shape, but, the way that we define the 5 different sections is that every time the curvature of the spine changes, and so you can see here that in this section, we kind of curve to the left, and then we kind of move to this next section, we start curving to the right, okay? And then we move on to the next section, we start curving to the left again. And then for the last part, we curve to the left or to the right. And then for the last part, we kind of curve down that way as well, okay? So, basically every time the curvature changes, we move on to a different section. And so labeling the different parts from top to bottom, at the very top, you have your cervical vertebrae, or your cervical spine, okay? And so this is the part that attaches to your head. And so your head is kind of up here, okay? And actually, the top two bones in the cervical spine, those actually attach to your skull. And so the top 2 are actually, different than the others. Okay? Then you have your thoracic vertebrae, which is the largest portion of your spine. And so that's the part that you can probably feel, if you touch your back from the back. Okay, so you're probably touching your thoracic one. And that has 12 different bones to it. Okay. Then we have your lower back, which is the site of, a lot of injuries. And so that is the lumbar vertebrae. Okay, so that's the part right down here. Okay. And then the last two sections of the spine, we consider these technically part of the pelvis, the pelvic bone, but because they have curvature like the spine, then we name them as well. Okay. And so the upper portion and the larger one is called the sacrum. Okay, so the sacrum is this portion of the spine right here, which is part of your pelvic bone. And then at the bottom, we have this kind of little tailbone right here. So I think most people call it the tailbone, but the scientific name for it is the coccyx. Okay. All right. And so, most people kind of generally have the same structure of the spine. There's some variation between, person to person, but generally speaking, you'll have all 5 sections in every single person. And most people actually generally have the same number of vertebrate bones in each section as well. Okay. All right, and so what you'll see a lot when you see doctors talking about the spine is that they'll refer to the bones, the different bones in the spine by a letter and a number. Okay, and so what that basically means is that the letter tells you what section of the spine that you're in. And so if the cervical spine is given letter C, thoracic spine is T, lumbar spines are L, sacrums are S, and there's only one coccyx, so we don't give that a letter. Okay, and then the number after the letter tells you which bone in the sequence that you're in. Okay, and so it's labeled from top to bottom. And so C1 is at the top right here. Okay, then you have C2, C3, C4, all the way up until C7, okay, because you have 7 cervical vertebrae. And then the count restarts once you reach the second section. And so the thoracic vertebrae, here you're going to start at T1, T2, T3, and so on and so forth. Okay. And so a lot of times, you'll see doctors and you'll see people describe, either the C1, C2 vertebrate bones, or L1, L2, L3, and so that's basically what they mean. Okay. All right. Any questions on any of this so far? Okay. So now let's talk about the structure of the vertebrate bones themselves. Okay, so the vertebrate bones have quite a unique shape, and so there's really no other bone in your body that's shaped in the same way. Okay, and the shape of the vertebrate bones are basically tailor-made for its specific purpose. Okay, and so the three, I guess, main sections of the vertebrate bones are its body. Okay, and so the body is going to be where most of the mass and most of the volume is. Then we have what's called the hollow ring. And so this is where the spinal cord passes through. And then we have kind of what I call, the bony appendages on the outside. Okay. Okay. And so let's go over each of the different parts. And so unfortunately, I kind of drew the top view of it down here, but that's what I'm going to focus on, right? And so the body of the vertebrae is labeled right here. Okay. And so the body of the vertebrate is very large and takes up most of the volume, because this is the part that's going to be bearing the weight. Okay, and so all the weight is basically on the body of the vertebrae, and it's large and strong so that it can bear all that weight. Okay. Next, we have the hollow ring, and so the hollow ring is this part right here. Okay, so you can see it's hollow just so that the spinal cord can pass through it. Okay. And then we have all these kind of bony appendages kind of on the outside. So they kind of make your spine almost look like Triceratops, but they have their own purposes as well. Okay, and so the purposes of the bony appendage, first of all, I think they look kind of cool, but then they serve the main purpose of limiting the range of motion of the spine. Okay, and so if you compare the spine to the other parts of the body that we've gone over so far, like the upper extremity and the lower extremity, you'll see that the spine has the least amount of range of motion. Okay, and so spine can't really move all that much because it's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be protecting and load bearing, right? And so to make sure that your spine doesn't go into a motion that's dangerous for your body, these bony appendages on the outside basically lock up to make sure that you don't do that. Okay. So for example, in this figure right here, you can see here that we have the body, the hollow hole is kind of right here, and these parts right here are the appendages. Okay. Okay. And then, just for points of reference, this right here would be the back of a person's body, and this would be the front. Notice the bony appendages are kind of in the back of the vertebrae. Okay? And so if you notice, one motion that's pretty difficult for your body to do relative to the other one is to bend backwards, right? So limbo is really hard for people because, what's blocking are these bony appendages. Because as you can imagine, as this kind of spinal column, as you start to try to bend backwards like this, right? And so if you bend backwards, then the curvature of the spine kind of goes in that way like that, right? What's going to happen for these appendages is that they're going to start to contact each other, right? And so eventually, you're going to reach a point where you can't bend back any further because these, appendages are kind of contacting each other and they can't move past each other anymore, okay? And so those are there so that you don't do any kind of dangerous back motion, okay? And that's, with the main purpose of protecting, your body and protecting your spine. Okay. All right, and so that's that's a bit about the anatomy of the vertebrate bones itself. Okay? Another trend that you'll notice is that as you go from the cervical spine, which is near your neck, down to the bottom and the lumbar spine, the vertebrae start to get progressively larger in size. Okay, And so if you compare the vertebrae in your lumbar spine at the bottom compared to the top, you'll see that the lumbar spine are much larger than the cervical spine, okay? And the reason for this is that, the lumbar spine are mostly there for load bearing, okay? Because not only are they carrying their own weight, but they're carrying the weight of all the other, vertebrae and the rest of the body on top of it. And so the lumbar spine, necessarily has to be larger so that it can take up all that weight. Okay. All right. Any questions on this? Okay. Okay. So next, let's talk about the discs. Okay. So remember when I mentioned before about the meniscus, right? There are a lot of parts of your body which have these kind of almost shock absorbers or kind of absorption pads or squishy pads in your body. Okay? And so the main part of your body that actually has this is your spine. Okay, because in your spine, you basically have all these vertebrate bones stacked on top of each other. And so, of course, as you go about your day, as you walk, as you jump, okay, what's going to happen is that these bones are going to be compressed together. Okay. And generally speaking, your body doesn't like it when you have bone-on-bone contact because that can cause some damage, that can cause some fractures. And so whenever, wherever it's most likely to happen in your body kind of puts like a tissue there to kind of stop that. Okay. And so for your spine, that tissue that kind of prevents your vertebrae from contacting each other are called discs. Okay. And they're given that name because they look like discs. Okay. Okay. So mechanically speaking, they're very fibrous, and so they're not like a squishy pad, but they actually have some some structure to them. Okay. And so I think probably the closest analogy to them is that they act like a spring. Okay. And so I think this image right here is a good kind of example where you have almost like a spring that goes around the vertebrae. Okay. And this is important because because they act like a spring, then they have a lot of elastic properties, right? And so we talked before about muscles having elastic properties. These discs are very much the same thing. Okay. And so these discs, they serve a very important purpose because they protect your vertebrae from contacting each other, prevent a lot of injuries. Okay? But with that said, a very common injury that can occur in the back is what's called a hernia. Okay, so when you have a hernia or herniated disc, what happens is that these discs become, they could get compressed so much that they actually start to bulge outwards. Okay, and so you're literally kind of squeezing it out from the socket. Right? And so when that happens, then it can be very painful because if you kind of remember from the anatomy of the vertebrae, inside right here is your spinal column. Okay. So that's one of the main nerves in your body. And because of that, it's very, very sensitive. So normally it doesn't like to be touched at all. And so what can happen sometimes is that if you have a herniated disc and that disc starts popping out, that disc can start to kind of pinch on that nerve and start to kind of, contact it when it's not supposed to, right? And so because your spinal column is basically just one big bundle of nerves, you can imagine that if you have something pressing against it, it's going to be extremely painful. And so, those people that have a herniated disc, it looks like they can't even walk because it's just so much pain in their lower back. Okay. And so, a lot of back injuries, a lot of spinal injuries occur because of herniated discs. And, a lot of the examples that we're going to go through, on pencil and paper, we're going to talk about, what are some situations that can cause herniated discs and what are some things that you can do to prevent that from happening. Okay. All right. Any questions on that? Okay. All right. And so we also have some terms here that can characterize spinal
have
curvature.
To run your records.
Oh, question?
They cannot, according to the law, ask you immigration status. No one can.
Interesting.
Is everything okay?
Afternoon.
Chicago and
Prem, are you okay? I'm gonna mute you for now, but if you you know, if something's going on, just let me know. All right. Okay, spinal curvature, and so right, and so like I mentioned before, there is a natural curvature to your spine, and so each of the different portions of your spine, are curved in a certain way. Okay, and so this image right here, is a kind of the natural, kind of shows the natural curvature. I try my best to trace it, but I did not do it well. There you go, that's a bit better. Okay. But any kind of unnatural curvature of the spine can be characterized by different terms. Okay, and so these are kind of the three terms that we have here. And so first is wordosis. Okay, and so wordosis is what happens when you exaggerate kind of the lumbar curvature of the spine. Okay, and so I think visually it kind of just looks like someone sticking their butt out. All right. And so wordosis itself is not bad. And so, you can do that yourself, right? So you can kind of stick your butt out. But if you have kind of a pathological wordosis where, if you're trying to stand up straight, but if you have excessive lumbar curvature, and so you kind of naturally stick your butt out, then that's a cause of concern. And that could be something that, a doctor may need to look at to realign your spine. Okay. But generally speaking, when you align your spine with excessive lumbar curvature, we call that wordosis. And so you can either have intentional wordosis where you kind of do it yourself and you kind of make that motion. But if your spine is kind of naturally like that with excessive curvature, then that's when you would have to go to a doctor. Okay. All right. So another term is kyphosis, and so kyphosis is when you have excessive thoracic curvature. Okay. And so this is kind of like the humpback notion. Okay. And so again, you can kind of form kyphosis on your own, but if you have an excessive curvature, then that's again something that the doctor will have to take a look at. And so these two can occur somewhat naturally. But I think the spinal arrangement that probably everyone has heard of, if you've gotten tested for this as a kid, is scoliosis. Okay. And so scoliosis is an unnatural curve of the spine in the left to right direction. Okay, so normally your spine is not supposed to curve in the left to right direction at all. But if you have any kind of curvature that develops in that direction, that's called scoliosis. Okay, and so this can happen in either a C shape or an S shape. And so it's pretty common. I'd say a little bit less so nowadays, but it's common for a lot of kids to get tested for this as they're growing up, because the hope is that if you can test this and you can detect it at an early age, then you can go in and intervene and prevent, and make sure that the child, you kind of correct that issue, because as the child develops, as they grow, you want to make sure that their spine is in good alignment, because if it's not, then it can cause a lot of health issues for them growing up. Okay, any questions on this? Okay. One more slide. Okay, so we have the muscles of the lower spine. Actually, this is important. Okay, so before we start getting into static biomechanics problems, it's important to know what muscles that we're going to be working. Okay? Because you'll see very soon when we do static biomechanical analysis, our goals are going to be very similar. So we're basically going to be looking at the body and certain kinds of configurations, and what we're looking for are the muscle forces and the joint reaction forces. In those configurations. Okay. And so the main muscles that we're going to be working with are basically shown in this figure right here. Okay. All right. And so, first one that we'll look at on the right here are your abdominal flectors. And so these are your abs. Okay. And so, this person's pretty ripped. He has an 8-pack. Right? I do not have an 8-pack. My abs are actually sore right now because I sneezed too much today. That's how out of shape my abs are. But your abs are very important muscles in your body because they act as kind of your core muscles, and they're mostly responsible for kind of flexing at your flexing your spine. Okay, so whenever you kind of bend forward, that's your abdominal muscles acting. Okay. You also have your oblique muscles, and so I don't think I have them pictured here, but your oblique muscles are kind of on the side. Okay. kind of on this side right here, okay? And they're kind of responsible for lateral and medial, movement. So kind of when you move your body kind of side to side, those are your oblique muscles, okay? But the one muscle that we're going to be talking about the most, because it's the one that leads to injury the most, are your spinal erector muscles. So those are the muscles that are kind of, they're, if you can kind of feel them, they're kind of right above your butt, kind of in your lower back, okay? And so they're basically all of these muscles right here, okay? And they kind of extend upwards like that. And so these muscles are almost always engaged in your body, even if you don't actively, tell them to engage, okay? Because these are the main muscles that are mostly used to keep you upright. And so, the muscles that kind of prevent you from falling forward are your spinal erector muscles. And what we'll see very soon when we do our examples is that the posture that you have, most importantly, when you're picking up something heavy, but even, when you're just sitting normally or when you're standing normally, if you have bad posture, then a lot of the load is going to be placed on your spinal erectors, right? And these are some muscles that you actually don't want to stress too much, because first of all, they can get injured very easily. And if they're working too hard, then it actually places a lot of stress on your spine, okay? And so a lot of ergonomics that you'll see, probably especially for a lot of you that are going to be, working in an office building or working with heavy machinery, a lot of ergonomics, a lot of ergonomics research actually goes into, how can we relieve a lot of the stress and a lot of the load on the spinal erectors? Because, a lot of research has been out there, and we'll demonstrate it with our examples too, that the less that the spinal erectors have to do, the less likely you are to get injured, in your back. Okay. Okay. Any questions on this? Okay. All right, so we have about 15 minutes left, and so I think we have some time to do a bit of examples, right? So let me go ahead and stop sharing here and come back to Zoom. On my tablet. Okay, so let's go ahead and start talking about spinal statics. Right, so just like we mentioned, the spine serves a very important part of your body. So not only does it give you a lot of support, but it's also critical in maintaining your balance and maintaining your posture. What can happen to a lot of people is that, if you put your body into certain positions, mostly if you have bad posture or bad technique doing certain actions, you can put a lot of stress on your spine and your back, that can lead to injury. Okay. Right. One situation that we're going to be looking at first, and it's something that's told to, I think, everyone that works with any kind of lifting, is your lifting technique. okay? And so the advice that's always given to people, if you're doing any kind of job or any kind of task that requires lifting, heavy boxes, heavy machinery, anytime you're going to the ground to pick something up and carry it, they always tell you lift with your legs, right? Okay, lift with your legs, not your back. So, let me just draw it visually. And so let's say that you have, a box here on the ground, right? The bad thing to do would be to basically keep your legs straight and kind of reach down at your hip and try to pick it up like this, okay? And so this is bad idea. Compute very soon, why that's exactly a bad idea, okay? Whereas what they recommend is that you kind of crouch down, keep your back straight as much as possible, and kind of lift up with your legs, okay? And so this right here is good idea. And you'll see very soon, and we'll have the calculations to back this up, not only, does the right, it engages more of your lower body. And so it basically forces your legs to kind of help with the lifting motion as well. Okay, so that places that where it relieves a lot of stress from your back. But what we'll see soon is that, the more important thing, or one of the more important things, is kind of the angle of your back. Okay. And so the more straight that you can have your back, the better that's going to be for your back, and the less injury prone that you're going to be. Okay, so the reason this is a bad idea is that this is going to require your spinal erectors to work a lot harder. Right, and so it's going to be forced to output a lot more force than what it's kind of designed for, and that increased force is going to put a lot of pressure and a lot of stress on your vertebrate joints, which are going to put a lot of stress on your discs as well. Okay. As for this one, good idea. This lets your legs kind of get in on the action as well. Okay. And so, so your back muscles don't have to do all the work. And because of that, because of the better posture, naturally, another thing people say is that, when you lift with your legs, it kind of forces you to get closer to whatever you're picking up. And so the moment arm for the muscle is a lot shorter. Okay, so that's going to also put a lot less stress. And so kind of the net result of all of this is that it doesn't put your back under as much stress. Okay. Okay. All right, so we have about 5 minutes left. Let me go ahead and draw the figure for the example. And then we'll talk about it for a bit, and then we'll actually get into the calculations on Thursday. Okay. Okay. All right. So first thing we're going to do, let's do the bad idea first. Right. It's always good to start with the bad idea. Okay, and so in this situation, let me go ahead and I'll draw kind of the whole lower extremity of the body. Okay. And so let's start with this booty. Okay. Okay. And so this is the kind of the situation. Man, it looks better in my notes, I swear. That's I know this guy's really very thick thighs. Okay, and so this is a situation, where he's bending down, his legs are relatively straight, and he's trying to pick up a load. Okay. All right, and so what we have here is that the main muscle we're going to be looking at are your spinal erector muscles, and they're going to be acting kind of right here. So we have FM, FM right there. Okay. All right. So first, let me define the direction of this muscle force. FM on the other side. And so we're going to define the direction of the muscle with theta m with respect to the vertical, just like we did with our first example today. Okay. Okay. Now we need the location of the joint. And so the joint is going to be, we're going to assume the joint is right here. Okay. So it's in kind of a strange position. So we have JX, JY. Okay. So right here is going to be our vertebral joint. And then we have a couple other loads we need to consider. And so we also have the load of the leg. And so the weight of the leg will be given right here. And then we also have the weight of the person as well as the weight of the object. And so we can say that we have the weight of the torso plus the weight of the object, which we'll call WL, okay? And since we're not modeling the torso here and the box is somewhere outside, we're gonna model both forces as a normal force coming up from the ground, okay? Okay. Let me go ahead and draw a couple more distances here. And so we have this distance, we'll call it A. This distance we'll call B. And then this distance between the normal force and the back joint, we'll call that C. Okay. So it's a little bit, I think I'll redraw it on Thursday. This one ended up being a little bit messy. But basically, we have a situation here where, we're solving for the muscle force and the joint reaction force is there, okay? And what you'll see is that, a big determinant of this force is actually going to be, this angle right here, okay? And what we'll see is that, as you kind of get better posture, better lifting technique, that angle will start to kind of go away. And as that angle goes away, that helps with that helps tremendously with the amount of force the muscle has to produce. Okay. I'll redraw it on Thursday. This ended up being a bit messy. All right. Any final questions on this?
Professor, may you please explain theta M again? Is that like us bending at our hips? Like,
Yeah. Yeah, so theta M, that's the direction of the spinal erector muscles. And so that's basically going to be, here we're measuring that angle relative to the vertical. And so kind of as we kind of straighten up our back, that theta M is going to get smaller and it's going to put a lot less stress on your back. Yeah, and so you can kind of consider that as the amount that you're bending over. pick up the load.
Gotcha. Thank you very much.
All right, any other questions on this? Okay, all right, so we'll pick this up on Thursday. So thank you everyone for coming today. Remember, check out the study guide for the midterm next week when you get the chance. Because Thursday I'm going to put up the poll so that you guys can vote. Right. So have a great day, everyone. Thank you everyone for coming today, and I'll see everyone on Thursday.
Oh yeah, actually, I came up with a question more so about the structure of the test.
Sure.
I know we have like a lot of like vocabulary terms. Is that going to be a focus of the test at all, or is it going to be mostly just like three-body diagram stuff that we're doing now?
Yeah, good question. So so the conceptual part will definitely be a big portion of the test. And so normally I do about 50%, for this class, half the test is going to be conceptual questions. But I'm not going to ask you to memorize the names. And so, we've gone over a lot of different bones and muscles. And so, I'm not going to ask you to memorize any of those names or where they're located. But you should kind of understand conceptually how they work. And so you should understand, what are the elastic properties of muscles, how does a muscle generate contraction, things like that. Yeah, so that's why the study guide is really key for this one, because I did cut a lot of like the straight up memorization part, and so make sure you look at the study guide before you study, so you don't have to get caught up in the memorization part.
Yeah, I hadn't looked at it yet, but I just had to ask because
Okay.
I just remember it off the top of my head. It's a ton of stuff.
Yep.
All right, cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Mhm. So there's probably going to be five conceptual questions, and they'll be kind of short answer, like maybe 2 or 3 sentences, and then anywhere between 2 or 3 different like free body diagram type questions. Yeah, so it depends on the timing, and so I'll have to see how long it takes to write everything. So I want to make sure you guys have enough time to finish the exam. Yep.
Hey, sorry about my bugging earlier today.
Oh, no problem. No problem.
So I actually want to go over my homework. I know it's better if I go ahead and look more into the webinar on my own, but
Yeah.
I'd rather have something one-on-one. Just
Oh, yeah, for
status
sure.
is a while back.
Oh, for sure.
I used to one of my stronger classes, but obviously 2-3 years ago.
Yeah.
So
I know it's been a while for everyone. So.
yeah. Do you think we just go over it really quick?
I do have another class next, but then we can look for like 5 minutes.
Then, sorry, one of your officers again. The thing is that I work on Wednesdays from.
Okay.
Yeah, I work from 8 to 3:30, and
Okay.
then Monday I'm free all day.
Okay.
But I'm not trying to wait till.
Sure, for sure. So I have office hours tomorrow, 4 to 5, but it's Zoom only. So it's going to be on and so if you want, so I'm here mostly on Tuesday, Thursday.
Gotcha.
And so if my office hours times don't work for you, just send me an email. So today you kind of caught me by surprise a little bit. And so if you send me an email first, then we can arrange a time for us to meet. And I can kind of plan my day kind of around that. So
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Do you think 5 minutes would be enough to at least cover part B? Because I was really confused on that.
yeah, let's
So
take
why-
a look real quick.
yeah, I don't understand why I wasn't getting the right. I mean, the setup seemed fine. It was even though I plugged in your numbers into my equation, and it came out exactly right. I figured out the 85-degree angle, which is where you have to add the theta M with the original theta.
Yep.
Because obviously it's now an elevated angle.
Yep.
Here we are, perfect. And yeah, but I don't understand why I wasn't getting the right. Why my answers were off by like 300, 200.
Yeah, I kind of remember looking at it for when I was grading the homeworks. And so the main thing I saw was that it looked like you were, and I know why you did this, because we did an example in class where with the hip joint, where we kind of split up the muscle force into 2 components, the X and Y, and we consider those separately. And so the comment I made for your homework is that for this one, you don't really need it, because what we have instead is we don't have the horizontal and vertical distances, which is what we had in that hip example. What we have instead are the distances along kind of the arm in this case. And so when you're computing the moment, so let's say just for F1, if I can draw here real quick, right?
It's historically, by the way.